So you're in your speech class and your instructor says something about joining the forensics team, and you're probably wondering, what in the heck are they talking about? What does forensics mean? In my head, I'm thinking perhaps crime scene investigation, which seems like an odd jump from a speech class, or it means something requiring DNA. Actually, forensics is not that at all. The word forensics actually refers to anything within a legal setting. So when we look at forensics medicine, it means literally forensics as its application and its application in law. So, in a public speaking sense, it refers to competitive public speaking. And the best way to think about what this whole activity is about is to think of it as a track team. Everybody has different events that they're doing, and they work on those events, and there's a coach, and you all go to a tournament together and are successful if you've practiced and worked hard. So, that's really what forensics is, basically competitive public speaking. So this is a quick tutorial on, if your instructor hasn't talked about this yet, or maybe you've gone to one tournament, but you still don't really know what's all happening. I'm going to quickly go over the four different types of events that you would find in competition. So the first type of event would be the platform events. And the platform events, for the most part, are 8 to 10 minutes in length, usually somewhere between those. I've got the little turtle to indicate a platform event. A platform event, by definition, is simply an event that is uh, geared with a certain topic in mind, something you might do in a public speaking class or an advanced public speaking class or a persuasion class. It's informative, persuasive, etc. So I'm going to give you the rundown of those particular events and kind of what they entail very briefly, of course. So the first platform speech is called an informative speech. An informative speech is exactly what it thinks, exactly as it sounds. It is a speech meant to inform somebody on some process, concept, idea. Usually, informative speeches in competition tend to deal with cutting-edge technology, other current events issues that are important. They might deal with psychology, they might deal with sociology, but they're usually pretty specific with a particular invention, concept, or technology involved. Usually, most of the platform speeches that I'm going to be talking about today have somewhere between 6 and 8 source citations throughout the speech. And I'll go into more detail on that in subsequent lectures. This is just an overview. So, the informative is simply a speech to inform. That's the easiest way to remember what it is. It's just an aha moment. I'm not trying to persuade you that any process or technology or concept is more important than another one. The second main platform event is what's called persuasive speaking, and this is again also easily exactly as it sounds. It is speech meant to persuade. Usually in competition, persuasive speeches tend to focus on a problem that should be solved. It can be a social issue, it can be a political issue, it can be a health related issue, it can be a legal issue, but it's usually something that's gone wrong and people are somehow harmed by this, and then the speaker's job is to propose some kind of solution. So many persuasive speeches aren't dealing with something like, why you should or should not go to college or, why you should or should not get married. It's usually a problem that we see in the world, either in the United States or somewhere else, and that needs to be solved. And, we might be a part of that solution. We might not have anything to do with that solution. It may be something on a governmental level. This speech also runs 8 to 10 minutes and has somewhere between 6 and 8 source citations scattered throughout. And again, you'll also get an update on subsequent lectures on how persuasive speech goes together. This is again quickly an overview. The third platform out of four is what's called speech to entertain. It's also called after dinner speaking, depending on the coach that you're talking to. So, speech to entertain and after dinner speaking, realize, are the same speech. They are speeches where you're taking a subject, either informative or persuasive, and you're looking at it in a humorous fashion. So many times, a persuasive speech or a speech to entertain is going to be maybe persuasive in nature, but not seriously persuasive, but it's just the structure lends itself to a persuasive speech, but not that we're trying to, poke fun of any serious, legal, racial, social issue. That wouldn't be appropriate. But just know that it's either called STE, which is speech to entertain, or ADS, which is after dinner speaking. Visual aids sometimes are incorporated in this speech, as also informative. I forgot to mention that, but that's something that you can discuss with your coach. And this is of all of the events, I would say most students really enjoy watching this one because the purpose is to make the judge and the audience laugh. The final platform event is what's called communication analysis. If it's also called CA to short. So if you hear people talking about I'm in STE or I'm in CA, you know what they're talking about. Communication analysis is a speech where the speaker is looking at some form of communication. Now that can be a political movement, it can be a slogan, it could be a song that was composed. It could be an art exhibition. It could be some speech somewhere, presidential speech, Academy Awards speech, something that we could label as communication, video games, something could label as communication. And then we look at how that thing actually works. Why was that speech successful? Why was that movement successful or not? It can also be about how it wasn't successful and why. And it applies some theory of communication. So generally, communication analysis is done when speakers and students feel like they might go into communication studies, even if not, because they're then exposed to some communication theory. But of the events, this is the one that is going to um, probably help hone your skill on the analytical writing you might do when you transfer to a university, if not before. But all of these obviously will help with your writing. But communication analysis is simply here's an event and here's a theory that helps explain why that event was so impactful or not. All right, moving into the other side, which is now the acting events. And of course, you're not really wearing a costume and you're not really on stage, but trying to find pictures of actual competition is actually rather difficult. So the acting events are broken up into the genre of literature that you're using. So prose interpretation, which of course is the largest category of probably the interpretation events, is anything both fiction and nonfiction. So this can be an excerpt from a novel, it can be a short story, it can be something from a diary, it can be letters, anything that's written in sentences and paragraphs will be considered prose interpretation. And the trick with all of these events, and they're called acting events, they also run 8 to 10 minutes, by the way, is that you're not full on acting, but you are acting quite a bit. In other words, it feels very much like what you would do on stage. You have to think about the character. You need to think about how they occupy space, how they talk, what is their motivation. Are they reliable or unreliable for the judge and the audience? Like, do I really believe this person, or are they just sort of saying stuff to make me think a certain way? So all of the acting considerations you go through if you are on stage, same thing with oral interpretation. These are what are called oral interpretation events. I just call them acting events because I think it's easier to remember that way. So, prose interpretation is the first. Again, these are also 8 to 10 minutes. You don't need source citations. But there is a section, which again I'll get into in subsequent lectures, where you actually present your own introduction with a theme. But for the most part, you're performing some piece of literature or a combination of pieces. So, prose interpretation, again, both fiction, nonfiction, written in sentences. All right, poetry interpretation is exactly as it sounds. It's literature that looks funny on the page. There's a particular rhyme scheme involved. Slam poetry, as we know it, also would be considered poetry interpretation. Song lyrics are considered poetry because they have a certain rhythm and a certain rhyme. Not that I'm encouraging anybody to do, song lyrics, because some of those might be difficult for a judge to listen to because then they get the tune in their head. But essentially, poetry usually means that you're probably gathering several different poems around a particular theme and sort of weaving those together to show how these are similar and different. So poetry usually, though not always, but usually requires more than one selection. Prose interpretation is usually just one selection. You then have dramatic interpretation, and dramatic interpretation refers to literature that is a stage play or a film script or the, a series on television. It can also be a radio play. Dramatic interpretation also includes stand up comedy routines, presidential speeches, anything. And this would be the broadest definition. Dramatic interpretation refers to anything that was meant to be performed out loud. So that's why stand up comedy routines would be considered dramatic interpretation, along with stage plays, which are also meant to be performed. Prose interpretation, short stories, novels are not meant to be performed. So that would be a different classification. And then there's a combination program, which is called Programmed Oral Interpretation. It's also abbreviated to POI, and that's when you combine prose, poetry, and drama, or any two of those three together into a program. So all these programs cater to a specific theme, and the pieces kind of help compare and contrast what this theme is about. The programmed oral interpretation one is, though, specifically there needs to be a nice balance between the two or three genres of literature, either prose and poetry, poetry and drama, or all three. It wouldn't be like one 30-second poem and then the rest a dramatic monologue. That would not be considered, the POI in terms of what it's supposed to be. There is one final category in this, and that is duo interpretation. And duo interpretation is simply two people reading usually a scene from a play or from a television series or from a radio script. It can also be any other kind of literature, but the two people then perform that. They share the lines. So just think of like a stage play that has two characters on stage. That would be duo interpretation. Now realize that all of these things, although I'm calling them acting events, they are much more restrictive in terms of what a person can actually do in performance. But those restrictions, I think, are also challenges. Is how can I convey or embody this character when I don't have a stage set, I don't have a costume, I don't have sound effects, I don't even have any props. All I have is this little black binder that I have to hold in my hand, and that's something that your coach will talk about. But essentially, that's the challenge with all of these, what I'm calling acting events, is that you are acting, and it feels like acting with certain restrictions that really challenge the performer to figure out how do I convey everything to an audience effectively. So these are the first two types of events. I've got two more types. Oh, sorry, forgot one. Reader's Theater. I'm not retaping this. I'm running this live here. So, Reader's Theater is three or more people performing literature. Reader's Theater is a category that certain, usually coaches, put the script together and then direct their students. So it's the one that's most like a play, which is why sometimes it doesn't get discussed in class. But know that there is something called Reader's Theater. It's a fairly robust and challenging activity. Scripts are usually 25 minutes in length, and the performers all do multiple roles. So it's blocked out. There can be music and singing, so it kind of embodies more of that acting sense. But know that it's called Reader's Theater. It's also called Interpreter's Theater. Interpreter's Theater, or IT. It's usually called RT or IT. RT is the old, or Reader's Theater is the old term. IT, Interpreter's Theater, is the new term, thinking that interpreter would get people to understand that you're not just reading something out loud. No, you're never reading just something out loud. You're always, embodying it a bit more. Now, moving on to the next two and the last two categories here. The next one is debate. On the left, and debate, I'm running where it says the minutes kind of refers generally to the whole time frame for the debate. It doesn't mean that each person speaks for 26 minutes or 40 minutes. And so the first one that I want to talk about is the one-on-one debate, which is IPDA. And this is the debate that is most lay audience friendly. It's meant to be kind of dueling persuasions, if you will. Each person takes a side. They present their side in a rather persuasive speech, which may or may not include debate jargon. And if you are taking a debate class, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But the topics tend to be a little less current events, a little less, political, and can include metaphors and proverbs in those. But they're essentially fact, value, or policy debates, usually of a nature that someone could talk about this in general conversation. So, and there is a format to that. Again, that will be a later discussion. And then you have parliamentary debate, which is two people versus two people. So two people are advocating for a topic, and two people are saying nah to the topic. So this is usually one where topics are phrased so that it's the United States federal government should, and then it's a policy from there, and it should get involved in the affairs of, a country, A, B, or C, or it's, the state of California should, and then, goes from there. And that requires a little bit more prep time, and each speaker has certain speaker responsibilities. But no, at least you got a partner. That's the nice thing about parliamentary debate. There's a third type of debate, which is done at certain universities and certain community colleges and not others. This is one I have in red because we don't usually do this kind of debate. This is very common, however, in high school, and also common in, like I said, in universities and some community colleges. It's called Lincoln Douglas. It's also one person versus one person, and it's an offshoot of an older style of debate where you have a topic for a semester or a year, usually a semester, and everybody runs with that topic, and everybody then plans out cases that then get argued. And so this was one where the topics are all going to be pretty much the same, and there's no uncertainty as to what that topic is going to be. There may be uncertainty as to what kind of argument people are going to bring up, but the topic is always the same. So I'm keeping that one in red because that's one that with our students isn't discussed, but just know that there is something called LD. So it's either called IPDA, Parley, or LD. And then finally, we've got the limited preparation events. Frog says, I don't know what I'm doing, which is how a lot of students feel when they walk into a limited preparation event. Limited preparation doesn't mean that you don't practice. It just means that you have limited preparation when you get to the tournament. Both of these are 7 minutes in length, and let me just break these down for you very quickly. So the impromptu speech is one where it's a 7-minute total time, usually gets broken down into 2 minutes prep and 5 minutes speaking, or 1.5 minutes prep and 5.5 minutes speaking. The idea is to speak longer as you move into open division. These topics tend to be quotation based, proverb based. They could be song lyrics. They could be quotations from famous people, philosophers, politicians, actors, writers. Many times at a tournament, you will also have included in that list of topics one word abstracts, political cartoons, slogans. So those can also be added. And so the speaker thinks about the topic, usually in novice, let's go with the standard 2-5. They prep for 2 minutes, and then they start speaking, and the judge counts their speaking time. And during that time, they need to show what this topic means, whether or not they agree or disagree with it, and provide some areas of analysis. And again, all this will be discussed later. And then the other type of limited preparation event is extemporaneous speaking. So extemporaneous speaking is kind of like impromptu with current events. So a speaker will get 30 seconds preparation. They get a choice of 3 topics. They pick one, and these are going to sound very similar to the parliamentary debate topics. It's, should the United States get involved in, and then the affairs of country X. And then you either argue yes or no. It might be something political. It might be anything that's in the news. So people who love looking at the news, people who love political science and are, checking in on the pulse of every, political activity of every country tend to really enjoy extemporaneous speaking. And so extemporaneous speaking does require source citations. So we're back to somewhere between 6 and 8 source citations. Impromptu speaking does not. You simply talk about, what you have learned in the world and apply that to the actual topic. Extemporaneous does require the research like the other ones. So that is a quick breakdown of the various types of events. So when we go back to forensics, what does it really mean? It means it's going to be an awful lot of work, but you know what? That work really pays off. You begin to realize you have a voice. Your voice has integrity, and when you practice over and over and over again, and you go into a competition, each time you get a little bit better. So know that these are all baby steps. The learning curve is steep, and these are all baby steps, but it's an activity that's going to make you feel more confident about who you are, what you know in the world, and you're going to meet some really interesting people, both on your own squad and at other squads. You're going to hear some really unusual and different topics, regardless of what event you're in. And over time, with a lot of hard work, you're going to have a lot of success. And that doesn't necessarily mean trophies in the short term. It means, are you more confident, poised, authoritative speaker? Are you a better citizen? Do you understand the world a little bit more? Do you apply that to your coursework, and do you then apply that to your career? That's what happens with forensics. So with that, that's the end of my first very quick discussion, which ended up being about 18 minutes and 38 seconds. And the next ones will be probably just a wee bit shorter, but I'll try to keep them fairly short. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next lecture.